I just want to introduce myself. I'm Steve Kossor. I'm a licensed psychologist and a certified school psychologist in Pennsylvania. This is the 5th year in a row that I've been invited to come to Autism One to talk about the program that I created in Pennsylvania almost 20 years ago, and to talk about funding for the treatment services that children need. About 20 years ago, I found out about a phenomenal funding source that would allow my staff, people under my supervision, to go into children's homes and schools and literally work with them like this, just right with them wherever they would go. And I would provide supervision to these people and training and oversight, and over time they would get farther and farther away from the child until they were no longer necessary. And the kids had shown remarkable improvement in as little as 4 months. The best part about this is the treatment can be delivered over a period of birth to 21. And it's funded entirely by Medicaid. And in 36 states, that funding is available for disabled children regardless of family income. So I've been going around the country talking about it as the greatest treatment funding secret ever concealed, and that's really what it is. The bottom line, I'm talking about the early and periodic screening, diagnosis, and treatment program that is buried within Medicaid. It's part of the Social Security Act, and therefore it is a civil right that children under the age of 21 who are enrolled in Medicaid are entitled to for the treatment of their disabling condition. Now, virtually nobody knows about this. The schools know about it. They know a great deal about it, to the tune of $10 billion of Medicaid money that they've taken over the last 2 decades. So it's been a wildly popular program within schools to take Medicaid money and apply it to their special education budget, whatever that means. So we have a program that has been in existence in the United States since 1967. I was recently honored at the White House as a champion of change for community mental health services. And I'm in the audience listening to these various people talk about their activities, and it was all for the purpose of promoting the Affordable Care Act. Well, I'm a fan of the Affordable Care Act because it's the first time in American history that human beings are entitled as a right of citizenship to health care, right? But I pointed out to the audience that we've had an entitlement program for children who are disabled for more than 50 years. It's called EPSDT. And the guy from the National Institutes of Health is sitting there nodding, absolutely. So I said to the audience, you know, the Affordable Care Act is going to be as unknown and ineffectual if you guys don't do a much better job of explaining the benefits to the public at large. Because look at EPSDT. It's been in existence as a federal mandate in all 50 states for 50 years. Actually, the EPSDT benefit didn't become a mandate until 1989. But still, we're talking about the answer to prayers that parents have about how to fund treatment for their children. Around October, November of 2012, the state of Pennsylvania, like every other state, really tried to kick in a major effort to destroy access to the EPSDT funding stream, and especially to a program that's called BHRS, Behavioral Health Rehabilitation Services. This is right, I've got like an adoring audience now, right? Well, we'll wait for them to calm down. What? I'm sorry? Yeah, let's hear it, you know? Okay. So BHRS is what allows my staff to go to the kids' homes and schools, follow them around, in some ways to act like a force field to repel the evil influences that they're surrounded by. We all know how cruel children can be to other children. So if you've got a kid with a disability who's in a regular education classroom, that kid is basically entertainment for all the sociopathically inclined little kids who are in the same classroom. Bottom line is, if you look at the typical classroom, there are at least 6 kids in any classroom of 30, at least, who qualify for professional mental health treatment. If none of them are getting it, they're going down the same awful path that that poor kid up in Connecticut went down with an autism spectrum disorder and wound up killing dozens of people in addition to his own mother. So in October and November of that same year, 2012, I listened to the managed care authorities talk about how they were going to modify the BHRS program to the point where they literally put it in writing and said that it had been endorsed by the State Department of Public Welfare, which is the state Medicaid agency in Pennsylvania, a new plan to redesign BHRS. And one of the redesigned components is this program is going to be time limited. Well, wait a minute, the federal law says it's birth to 21. If it's necessary, it needs to be delivered throughout that time period. So there's the first problem. Then they proceed to unveil the plan, which they swore had been vetted and approved by the state, where they were going to create 3 levels of compensation to providers of these services. The first level, gold, was going to compensate people with no questions asked. We're not even going to quibble about it. We'll just approve it and you're good to go. If you prescribe 10 hours a week or less of treatment. Now, wait a minute. The National Academy of Sciences since 2001 and the American Academy of Pediatrics twice, in 2007 and 2010, I believe, all concluded that a child with autism spectrum disorder symptoms requires a minimum of 25 hours of intensive individual treatment every week in order to have a reasonable probability of getting better. Now, don't forget, autism overlaps ADHD to the point where you cannot diagnose ADHD and autism or autism spectrum disorders at the same time, right? So what we're saying here is the National Academy of Sciences and the American Academy of Pediatrics is saying unless the kid gets 25 or more hours of intensive individual treatment every week, he probably isn't going to get better. Okay, so how come the insurance companies and the state of Pennsylvania endorse 10 hours a week as the cutoff for the gold level? All right, well, let's say you're prescribing 11 to 15. That makes you a silver level provider and you get paid a little less. But if you prescribe more than 15 hours a week, you're in the bronze level. And your entitlement is to be scrutinized relentlessly for 30 to 45 minutes for every single packet you submit, and you're paid at a lower rate. They, with a straight face, presented this to the audience, and I put my hand up and I said in the public meeting, I don't think your proposal is advisable or permissible. And I sat down. A couple of months later, the kid in Newtown, Connecticut went berserk and on his killing spree. That kid had an autism spectrum disorder. December 14th, I had had enough. I sat down and I wrote a complaint against the Department of Public Welfare in Pennsylvania and all of the insurance companies that support BHRS funding, which is an EPSDT entitlement. And I complained. I filed a complaint online with the Office for Civil Rights, and a little more than a year later, that office notified me that they're taking up my complaint. They're investigating it. Well, they should, because EPSDT, as I'm going to show you, is an entitlement under federal law for any child with a disability who is enrolled in Medicaid or is eligible for enrollment in Medicaid. So you have an entitlement under federal law that's part of the civil rights of American citizens for those who are disabled and eligible for enrollment in Medicaid, and you have insurance companies that are saying, no, you don't have that right, because although you said as a licensed practitioner who examined the child face to face, Although you said he needs 25 hours a week, we're only going to allow 5 because 25 is ridiculous. Wait a minute, that's what the National Academy of Sciences, the American Academy of Pediatrics both say is the minimum. So you're an insurance company and you're going to declare that that's ridiculous, that's not medically necessary, and you're going to claim the absolute authority to make that ruling. And I just went ballistic. The kid up in Connecticut was eligible for and had access to the EPSDT funding stream. His mother, who he also killed, didn't know that. Nobody told her. He could have had treatment like I've been giving to dozens, if not hundreds of kids since 1981. He could have had access to that too. It could have helped him form a more realistic and more humane bond with people. It might have provided the force field around him that would not have resulted in, or would have prevented his being humiliated and emotionally abused by other kids. It might have saved literally dozens of lives. His mother didn't know about it. The school was taking hundreds of millions of dollars. Since 1992, at least, they have been taking Medicaid funds. So bottom line is, I saw red and I said, we've got to stop this. We have to do something. The advocate community denied any knowledge of civil rights law. The lawyers I talked to, that I begged for information about this, the state authorities that I appealed to in an attempt to get a dialogue about how can you let the insurance companies deny access to what are civil rights? Nobody answered the call. It's like Butterfly McQueen in Gone with the Wind. I don't know nothing about no rights of civils. They literally pleaded ignorance, which is a travesty in and of itself. So I went down and looked up on the internet and talked to a couple of people at the Office of Civil Rights in Philadelphia, and they said, of course this is a civil rights issue. You're a mandated reporter if you're aware of a deprivation of civil rights. You know these kids' civil rights are being trampled upon. You're obligated to make a complaint. Okay, how many other providers of services have ever made such complaints? And it's a big zero. You never bite the hand that feeds you. Well, I'm biting it off to the elbow, right? The bottom line is the Civil Rights Act provides protection against people who make reports. So although the authorities in Pennsylvania may loathe me with a capital L, and the insurance companies may detest me with a capital D, they are restrained in their ability to attack me overtly. So they're going to persist in their covert attacks and make life unpleasant. But what I'm here for is to tell you that you as parents, you as advocates, can file an Office for Civil Rights complaint in your state and claim that your child's access to medically necessary treatment like BHRS, which I created my own version of 20 years ago, and have 20 years of research to back up its efficacy, that your child is entitled to that same level of treatment in your state as a civil right. And we don't know how the Pennsylvania thing is going to play out yet. I'm pretty confident that I nailed it chapter and verse in terms of the federal and state laws, and I'm confident that I'm right, and we'll see how it plays out. It's a political battle, but the important thing is, when you file an Office for Civil Rights complaint, and you cite the violations of the Civil Rights Act that are being perpetrated, when a child's entitled to EPSDT funding under the Social Security Act, under Medicaid, and in 36 states a kid can enroll in Medicaid regardless of family income, wait a minute, virtually every child with an autism spectrum disorder or ADHD or any one of a dozen other disabilities is entitled to funding through EPSDT for their treatment. Now you realize, well, wait a minute, Pennsylvania is one of the more liberal states in granting access to EPSDT funds. If they are deficient, oh my God, how deficient are all of the other 49? So the purpose of my presentation today is to show you how easy it is to file an Office for Civil Rights complaint that you can do in the privacy of your own home without any legal representation. It will extend a protection over you, that you're free from reprisals and whatever. And it's my understanding that when parents file these complaints regarding the inadequate education program that their kid has been bestowed upon, that forces the education system to rise to the occasion and do what they should do anyway. Well, wait for it. If that's almost a guarantee of advocacy support, how much more of a guarantee is it that the behavioral health needs of children, which are now supported in the Affordable Care Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, et cetera, how much more potent can the Office of Civil Rights be in advocating for the rights of children to get the treatment that they are entitled to under federal law? So here we go. The Office of Civil Rights, this is the URL, you can go log on. And what they'll tell you is that, quote, we are a federal enforcement agency that investigates complaints, enforces rights, promulgates regulations, develops policy, and provides technical assistance and public education to ensure understanding of and compliance with non-discrimination and health information privacy laws. This is their mission. So the question, a lot of these slides are taken directly from the Office of Civil Rights website. The question says, does OCR represent me in my civil rights complaint? And the answer is no. They are not legal representation. They are what they just said they are. They investigate complaints, enforces rights, promulgates regulations, develops policy, and provides technical assistance and public education. That's what they do. So they are a neutral fact-finding agency. Our charge is to ensure that the laws under our jurisdiction are not violated. Good for them. They are a resource. Although we will consult with you, you may not be satisfied with any individual remedies proposed. Now, I put it in red letters because I'm not a lawyer and I don't want some jackass from the internet accuse me of practicing law without a license. You should consult an attorney about your right to file a private lawsuit in court if you wish to protect fully your individual rights and remedies. And there are penalties for delay in making those filings. We're not talking about filing a lawsuit. We're talking about filing a complaint to the Office for Civil Rights so that they will wake up to the fact that the civil rights of all children with disabilities in your state are being systematically deprived. So how does OCR investigate a civil rights complaint? Well, once a complaint is received, the Health and Human Services Office for Civil Rights must determine if it has the legal authority to review and investigate the complaint. Now notice here I put it in red letters. OCR authority is primarily over recipients of federal financial assistance from the Department of Health and Human Services. That's Medicaid. The Office of Civil Rights is absolutely over the Department of Health and Human Services. So if your state accepts Medicaid, and they all do, your child is entitled under federal law to Medicaid funding if he is disabled, and in 36 states, if he's disabled and you make more than the federal poverty level, he's entitled as a family of one. Once it is clear that OCR has jurisdiction, and they certainly do in Medicaid, to handle your complaint, the investigator will gather information through interviewing witnesses, obtaining documentation, and making visits to appropriate sites. Between December of 2012 and December of 2013, they made those inquiries. And lo and behold, upon making those phone calls, they determined that, yeah, something is warranting our investigation in Pennsylvania. Oh my heavens. So they sent me a letter saying, we'd like 5 current cases, stuff that has occurred since we started making our inquiries. So I said, I can give you 100, you know? And, well, no, please, 5, okay, 10 max. So I wound up sending them 8. And the 8 were selected strategically from every range of the process, from the local county government that did its thing, to the state people who did their thing, to the insurance companies who did their thing, right up to and including the Secretary of the Department of Public Welfare who did her thing. And all of them systematically, in my opinion, deprive children of their civil rights by denying access to EPSDT funding. Some of them actually did it with a single sentence. The Secretary of the Department of Public Welfare said, no, we're not going to review this. We agree with the previous findings. Wait a minute, you're supposed to review it. It's a request for reconsideration. That means when I send you the evidence, you're supposed to reconsider it, not just say, yeah, we saw this reviewed and we're going to agree with the previous level. You know, it's wrong. There has to be a fair assessment of the evidence. So in my case, when I prescribe treatment that is necessary, that fully meets the definition of medical necessity in Pennsylvania, and that cites every conceivable chapter and verse of how we are not encouraging dependency in the child, that we're maximizing their autonomy and independence. And all of this is taken into account in an 18-page life domain, bio, psycho, social assessment. In one case, it was 25 pages. When you dot the I's and cross the T's to that extent, and somebody in some airless, windowless room who is alleging to read that report, never speaking to the child, the parents, the teachers, nobody, and simply pushes it off the table and says, no, you get 5. Or even worse, you get nothing. That, to me, is an affront to reality. They are not playing with a full deck. They're playing with a deck that the state government is allowing them to use. And there's nothing but aces in it. And they just keep holding it up. We win, we win, we win. And the parents, when they go to complain, they have the same lousy luck that I do. No matter who you complain to, they always agree with the level below. Or when they do turn it over once in a blue moon, it literally is that infrequent. So the message coming out loud and clear is, we in charge, you not. This is managed care, get used to it. Well, managed care in the world of regular human beings may do what it does. We all love it, right? We've all had that awful experience where they've denied our need for treatment, right? Under EPSDT, you're not just entitled to treatment, you're entitled to treatment funding through EPSDT that is sufficient in amount, duration, and scope to reasonably achieve the purpose for which it is furnished. That's federal law. Now, who determines the purpose for which treatment is furnished? How many people think that it's the guy sitting in the airless, windowless room who may or may not read my report? Well, no court on earth has ever made that determination. It's always been the licensed practitioner who saw the kid face to face and prescribed it. So if I prescribe 30 and I've got 20 years of research evidence that shows that there is an association between that level of care and improvement in the child's condition or stabilization in their condition, then I have irrefutable proof that it is medically necessary. And I put that in my report, and the character in the airless, windowless room sweeps it off the table because that's why they're paid. This is an ethical practice of psychology? I don't think so. That'll be the next level of attack, because it's not ethical. For you to conclude that a child doesn't need treatment without reviewing the document and weighing the issues raised in it professionally, you're giving the kid a disservice at a minimum. So you may be interviewed again and can submit additional evidence. I called a friend of mine who's a pretty well-known advocate in Pennsylvania, and I said, hey, I'm going to file this complaint with the Office for Civil Rights, and I just want you to know I don't want to be a voice crying out in the wilderness saying, help. I'd like you to pass this around to all of the families in Pennsylvania that you've ever met and ask them if they'd like to contribute their own horror stories about how their kids' access to treatment or funding, whatever, has been summarily discarded by the state, by the county, by the whomever. And she said, sure. And she wound up filing her own complaint in her own kid's life. And there were, I don't know how many, but let's say at least several dozen families from throughout Pennsylvania who all sent complaints to the Office for Civil Rights within a week of my filing my complaint. That may have made a difference. So the bottom line is, you don't ever fight a battle by yourself. You need to get as much of an army surrounding you as you can. So I'm not recommending you be a lone wolf, file a complaint, and everything's going to be rosy. But in every state in the nation where access to EPSDT funding is less available than it is in Pennsylvania, except for schools, they can tap it without any managed care oversight whatsoever. But in every state, it's less available than it is in Pennsylvania. You should file an Office for Civil Rights complaint, and by the end of the talk today, you'll know exactly why to file, where to file, what information to include, and I hope I will inspire you to contact me if you have any questions after the program today. At the conclusion of investigation, the HHS Office for Civil Rights issues a closure letter, which presents OCR's decision on whether there has been a violation of a federal statute or regulation. If there is a finding of a violation, the recipient is then allowed a specific time period, usually 60 days, to correct it or provide OCR with a plan of correction. You'll remember the Office for Civil Rights is an enforcement body. They don't just make recommendations. If you're violating civil rights, these are the guys that can, wait for it, cut off federal funding to the state. So they are enormously powerful in their capacity to compel states to comply with civil rights laws. Let me give you an insight about how powerful they are. Remember I told you about what was planned in the state in October, November of 2012? This ridiculous structured system deliberately designed to coerce providers into minimizing their prescription. Within 9 days after my filing this Office for Civil Rights complaint, the state swept all of those plans off the table. One of the local attorneys, who's a representative of disabled kids, calls me and says, I don't know how you did it, but they swept it all off the table. Their plans are dead. It's derailed. They're not even talking about it anymore. Okay, good. Then I had some positive effect. Well, all they did was take it underground because they couldn't promote it as a public policy anymore because it was a wanton violation of the kids' civil rights. In March of 2013, the state issued a proposal to redesign the BHRS system, and by sheer coincidence, 17 of the 18 complaints that I made were addressed in their new proposal in March. All right, looks like there's some traction happening here. Well, wait a minute. In October of last year, they issued fundamentally the same draft again. Now, wait a minute. The draft process is you put it out there, you get comments, you tweak it, and then you issue a final proposal, a final bulletin. State didn't do that. We still have a second draft covering the same BHRS redesign process. So what this looks to an untrained eye, this looks like foot dragging. So I sent a copy of both of the draft proposals to the Office for Civil Rights, in the context of the ongoing investigation. So in other words, it just keeps piling up. The evidence is at this point overwhelming that there is a conscientious and systematic attempt, spearheaded by people within the Department of Public Welfare in Pennsylvania, orchestrating a systematic deprivation of access to EPSDT funding, which amounts to, I think, a violation of civil rights. Where this will go, nobody knows. But in other states where this kind of thing has been alleged, it's called a Section 1983 action, which holds the people responsible for this behavior personally liable for their acts or omissions. So again, it's not a lawsuit, it's a complaint. And enterprising attorneys can now kind of like gather round the ACLU, the NAACP, both of whom I contacted in my appeal for information support backup in this process. They can finally step up to the plate because it's been a complaint that's been filed and is under investigation. They have yet to do so. So the bottom line is a final decision upholding a finding of a violation may result in the termination of federal financial assistance to the recipient. That means to the State Department of Public Welfare. They're literally jeopardizing their entire Medicaid fund by depriving these kids of their civil right to access to EPSDT funding. That's the short version of my message. This is how powerful the Office for Civil Rights can be. Now, you need some basic information, and on the Office for Civil Rights website, you'll see all of the various regions. Here's Region 3 that it is located in Philadelphia, and it covers Delaware, D.C., Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and West Virginia. Barbara Holland signed the letter sent to me saying, we will investigate your complaint and we'd like 5 new cases. So the bottom line is they listen, and they listen carefully because there is such an abundance of legislation supporting the right of access to EPSDT funding. It's not a question of, well, am I interpreting this too much? It's there in black and white. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act protects a qualified individual with a disability. A qualified individual is someone enrolled in Medicaid, for example, from discrimination in the provision of any benefit or service provided under any program or activity receiving funds from the Department of Health and Human Services. Section 1557 of the Obamacare legislation, right? The Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act provides that an individual shall not be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination on the grounds prohibited under, among other laws, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Or under any health program or activity, any part of which is receiving federal financial assistance, or under any program or activity that is administered by an executive agency or any entity established under Title I of the Affordable Care Act or its amendments. Behavioral health services is a mandatory part of the Affordable Care Act. So you now have 3 federal authorities saying that this discrimination that is happening against people who want access to EPSDT funding is illegal. Discriminatory actions that are prohibited under that authority include denying a qualified individual with a disability an aid, benefit, or service that is provided to others. Now, wait a minute, if you deny it to a kid in Tennessee, but it's available in Pennsylvania, that is what the Affordable Act prohibits. Providing a different or separate aid, benefit, or service to a qualified individual with a disability unless such action is necessary to ensure that the aid, benefit, or service is equally effective as those provided to others. So there is some wiggle room here, but the bottom line is there is no data showing that outpatient treatment of children works. None, because fundamentally it doesn't. If you're going to listen to a kid lie to you once a week about what's going on in his life and his parents wring their hands while they're writing the check to you, that's a way of making a living. We all have to choose how we make our living. The bottom line is, if you're doing BHRS, sending a person with a bachelor's degree into a kid's home, into a kid's school, going where the kid is, and spending 2, 3, 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, years working with the kid, 12, 15, 18, 25, 30 or more hours a week, all based on that child's individual needs. Who could possibly withstand that level of treatment and not make gains? Nobody. In fact, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Thomas Jefferson University in Pennsylvania, Villanova University, and Immaculata University have all had independent researchers look at my data, and they've all said, wow, 75, 80% of the kids you're working with are showing improvement in as little as 4 months. This is astounding, because every other treatment program on earth might show 55, 65%, tiny percents of improvement. You're orders of magnitude more improvement, and you've got over 1,000 cases that you've documented. Wow. Now wait a minute, we can't say that your treatment caused those effects because we didn't have a control group. Okay, we didn't, but hell, there's 1,000 of them and 850 of them showed improvement. I didn't cause it, of course not. Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in programs and activities of all state and local governments, which may include imposing eligibility criteria that screens out or tends to screen out an individual with a disability from fully or equally enjoying any program or activity unless such criteria is shown to be necessary. When you create a separate special carve-out status for kids with autism, and you say to that group of parents, hey, look, you guys are so well organized, we're going to basically kowtow to you. We're not going to argue. We're going to exclude the autism kids from this laundry list of criteria that have to be met in order to get services, because we're not going to fight with you. They're violating this statute. They're saying that the kids with ADHD have to go to a different standard, a higher standard. They have to get other services that the kids with autism, who also have ADHD symptoms, are accessible to. Right? So it's just rotten everywhere you look. Managed care is fundamentally incompatible with EPSDT funding. They put this enormous pit bull-like being in a little box where EPSDT is kept, and this thing will scare the bejesus out of you because it's got big teeth and it's really loud. But if you look around the side, you realize it's got an 18-inch collar around it, and it's bolted to the floor, and all it really can do is make lots of noise. That's what you're facing. That's what I've discovered. That's why I do these talks all over the country. This is literally the place where you file a federal Office for Civil Rights complaint. You just click on this link right here. It'll take you to that URL, and you file it online. This is what I filed online. This is the text of it. I claim that disabled children enrolled in Medicaid in Pennsylvania who are prescribed BHRS treatment under the EPSDT mandate of the Medicaid Act that meets all of the criteria for the definition of medically necessary treatment, which is specified in Pennsylvania law, are denied funding by behavioral health managed care organizations and the Pennsylvania Department of Public Welfare, who claim that the prescribed services are not medically necessary. By the way, don't feel like you have to write feverishly. I will give this to anybody who wants it. Ed and Terry Aranga at Autism One are absolute saints in that this is being streamed live over the internet or will be available tonight, tomorrow. I'm recording it myself. so that I can put it up on my website, on YouTube, and you're going to have the benefit of this for nothing. Take it and spread it around. That's my hope in coming here. So my continued complaint says the behavioral health, managed care organizations, and the Department of Public Welfare denials are not consistent with the definition of medically necessary treatment and violate the civil rights of disabled Pennsylvania children by denying EPSDT funding for the treatment of their disabilities by this and other means, and I attached 18 pages of documentation. Chapter and verse, this is what they did, here's what I submitted, this is what they did with it. It stinks. It absolutely has an odor about it. I'm sorry, it's just, yeah. I'm a licensed psychologist. I have a master's degree, okay? I got licensed back in 1981. And within about 12 hours after getting my license, I started supervising a person under my scope of practice as a psychologist who was going into the home of a kid with a disability, and we proved that this was a way of helping. Well, over the years, the Psychology Association, the board rather, made strictures that you had to have at least a master's degree and back and forth. So I filed a complaint against the State Board of Psychology saying, look, you're unfairly restricting the practice of psychology in this state by requiring my staff to have a half of a master's degree before they're allowed to do this kind of work that everybody else in the state just needs a bachelor's degree to do. So I want you to declare this activity to be not the practice of psychology, because it's not. It's still a professional service. It's still behavior support, but it doesn't rise to the level of the practice of psychology. Well, in April of 1999, the Psychology Board agreed with me, and they made other requirements that there had to be a minimum amount of supervision, given to these people and whatnot. So what I'm getting at is, throughout my career, I've been a pain in the ass to the authorities. Okay? I'm the burr under the saddle. Okay, I'm the burr under the saddle, and I'm telling you, you have people who will join you under the saddle and poke at the authorities who are messing up your kids' access to treatment. One of them's the Office for Civil Rights. How do you get bigger than that? This is Pennsylvania's definition of medically necessary treatment. When you read this thing, it will immediately dawn upon you that, oh my God, you can drive a bus through this. So read it. A service item, procedure, or level of care that is necessary for the proper treatment or management of an illness, injury, or disability is one that, and they have 3 different flavors. The first flavor is that it will, or is reasonably expected to, prevent the onset of an illness, condition, injury, or disability. Prevention's the #1 rule. This almost literally tracks word for word what the federal requirements are. Every state has their own definition of what medically necessary treatment is, and to a greater or lesser extent, they all comply with this because they have to. The second flavor is if the treatment service will or is reasonably expected to reduce or ameliorate the physical, mental, or developmental effects of an illness, condition, injury, or disability. If it's going to reduce the intensity of the problem, it's medically necessary. But wait, if it will assist the recipient to achieve or maintain maximum functional capacity in performing daily activities, taking into account both the functional capacity of the recipient and those functional capacities that are appropriate of recipients of the same age, it's medically necessary. What's missing? Absolutely nothing. And here's the best part. In every evaluation we do, we cite these 3 reasons for prescribing the treatment. All 3 of them, because they're all part of the examiner's recommendation. So how can you say, well, we don't think it's medically necessary for him to get 30 hours of treatment, we'll let you get 5 or none after reading that prescription? How can you do it? You can do it for as long as you get away with it. We'd still have slavery today if there hadn't been a legal prohibition against it. This just for the sake of credibility. When I do these talks, I have to establish my credibility. So this is one quick way that I do that. This is a letter received by the Honorable Jim Gerlach, who is my congressional rep. And it's from a lady named Cindy Mann, who is one of the directors at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. I don't call this an endorsement. They don't call it an endorsement. But if you read it, it says, "My staff has spoken with Mr. Kossor, and we learned that he has indeed developed an effective approach to serving children and adolescents with developmental disabilities and has made the approach available to Medicaid-enrolled children through EPSDT. We agree that Mr. Kossor has a great deal of expertise and is a passionate supporter of EPSDT." All right, so they recognize it. I've been cited by Congress, by both houses of the Pennsylvania legislature, the President's New Freedom Commission for Mental Health, et cetera, as knowing what I'm talking about. So we'll just fly through this. EPSDT was created in 1967 for children under 21 years of age. This is the range of benefits, and at the bottom it includes other services, including mental health care, since 1967. This is the actual statute within the Social Security Act that talks about EPSDT funding. It's located at Section 1905 R5. It's in federal law. This is the section within Chapter 4, Part 440.130 that talks about all the services that are available under EPSDT, one of which is rehabilitation services, and that makes behavioral health rehabilitation services a mandatory part of EPSDT funding in all 50 states. There are three key concepts about EPSDT. The first is each service must be sufficient in amount, duration, and scope to reasonably achieve the purpose for which it was furnished. That's federal law. And now we talk about education. I have to make sure you understand that there are two taps on the Medicaid keg. Remember I said schools are drawing money out of Medicaid with no control whatsoever, no managed care oversight? Well, that's a tap at the bottom of the keg. Don't worry about that. It's imaginary. It doesn't exist. Your tap is at the top of the keg. And if you know how to operate it, it has no effect whatsoever on the tap at the bottom of the keg. And here's a memo. The Department of Education said, hey, look, parents are turning down access to EPSDT funding. Wait a minute, they're depriving us from being able to access it because they're afraid that it might reduce their own access to treatment funding through the top keg. So you need to send out a notice, and they did, saying that, quote, the health-related services a student receives through the school-based access program are separate and apart from the MA services a child receives outside of the school setting. And additionally, there is no cap or limit on the amount of money that may be paid by the MA program for school-based access services or MA services that the MA-eligible child may receive. They are completely independent funding sources from the same keg. So let's talk quickly about putting BHRS in a wraparound cup. There are two programs that are going on, and this is the logo that you'll see on my business card, because I think that BHRS in a wraparound cup is effective treatment in a wraparound cup. Let's talk about wraparound real quick. There's a guy named Eric Bruns, PhD, who is the head of the National Wraparound Initiative, and he goes all over the world promoting wraparound. When Eric testifies in court, he makes sure to point out that wraparound is not a replacement for treatment. Yet people keep clamoring for wraparound to be used as if it's a replacement. I leave it to you to determine why that's the case. We all have to choose how we make our living after all. So the bottom line is, care management, which is wraparound, is not treatment. Intensive case management is not treatment. And ensuring that interventions are leading to improved outcomes is not treatment. Those are the fundamental components of wraparound, and I endorse them wholeheartedly, but they're not a replacement for treatment. So what happens if you put real treatment, BHRS, inside a wraparound cup? You have a really viable treatment model, and that's what I've done. Medication is touted by doctors as the single most effective treatment for ADHD. That's based on a flawed study that has now been outed, finally, and Russell Barkley, who is probably the world's leading authority about ADHD, says, quote, "The treatment of ADHD requires a comprehensive behavioral, psychological, educational, and sometimes medical evaluation followed by education of the individual or their family members as to the nature of the disorder and the methods proven to assist with its management." ADHD doesn't get cured by medicine. It gets suppressed. You have to learn behavioral strategies to cope with it as a behavioral condition in order to suppress the experience of ADHD, and there's a very clear body of literature that can be implemented through the BHRS system. By the way, applied behavior analysis is the #1 treatment for autism in the world. You can implement it very easily through BHRS, funded by Medicaid, through EPSDT, and get 25 hours a week for your child of ABA therapy funded at no cost whatsoever through the Medicaid Act. These are some of the services that we provide. It's all described in the purple brochure at the back. This is some of the evidence we've collected over the last decade. You can see that the kids started out up here with various problems in safety, awareness, physical aggression, and non-compliance. After we started therapeutic staff support, which is the one-to-one TSS bachelor's level person involved in the kid's life, you can see that it reduced. Well, here's a better example. It reduced colossally because any difference of 2 points is statistically significant. And here's another presentation of the same data. You can see that there's no question it's going down. How could it not go down? My staff are in the kid's life. So what happens when my staff gets sick for 3-4 days? When my staff disappear from a kid's life for up to 3 weeks, the behavior doesn't return to baseline because the kid has internalized a lot of the skills. Now, after 3 weeks with no support, things start to creep back up. So anybody who says, well, of course they're doing well because you're on them like right on top of them. No. When my staff are not right on top of them, they retain the skills. The teacher, the aide in the classroom retains the standards. So what does a kid with an autism spectrum disorder who's also got an intellectual disability need? They need this for years, especially during the early developmental period when their standards of interacting with other children are forming. We take on a kid, the youngest kid I've ever worked with was 16 months old. We did BHRS. The kid learned to have a social level. I started with one kid, he was 4. We finished with him when he was 9. I got a call a couple of years ago from his mother while I was at a conference, and she said, I just had to tell you, he is a violin virtuoso. He's got a girlfriend. We just had his bar mitzvah, and there were 200 people there, and he did a violin performance. I can't thank you enough. And get this, Stanley Greenspan, who they had a direct contact with for years, told her that had it not been for my intervention in that kid's life and the delivery of BHRS, he doesn't know where he would have been because he had a score nearly off the charts at the age of 4 as an autistic child, nonverbal, stimulus-bound, you name it. And now here he is, the life of the party. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I met with Greenspan 3 times personally and told him about this. He's not with us any longer, and he absolutely loved this because he believed that peer interaction was the most important part of any kid's treatment program. Typically, developing peers have an ability to get stuff across to developmentally disabled kids that adults just don't have. So when you structure peer interactions with typically developing kids, and one of my staff preps the kid before he goes into it, stays with him during it, and then preps him afterward and says, okay, what worked, what didn't work, what are we going to do next time? Every single week, 2 or 3 times a week, with peer play activities. That's why this kid is recovered from autism. Now, we don't do that for everybody, and certainly that family had incredible resources to have 200 kids at a bar mitzvah. This gives you some idea of the family's resources. But the bottom line is, if you have a committed and dedicated family, and you add 25 hours a week from one of my staff who's been trained, supervised, and monitored on an ongoing basis, and you're taking outcome data from the parents about that kid's progress every single week, that is a prescription for 85% or more success in any child's life, regardless of their age, gender, disability. And we've got data that shows that as well. Here's a simple summary. We did a tiny study, 23 kids, 53 treatment plans. The average treatment term was 1.4 years. 90% completed the treatment in 3 years or less. And there were no differences between autistic kids, kids with ADHD, other diagnoses, no difference when the treatment was interrupted, no halo effect was apparent, and the significant reduction that was recorded in physical aggression, lack of safety and environmental safety, lack of compliance with adult prompts, communication deficits, and socialization deficits were all significant at a level that ought to justify publication in journals. But wait a minute, the journals want us to publish research comparing the kids who got treatment with the ones who didn't. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to withhold treatment from anybody. This is too good to withhold from anyone. So we don't have a peer-reviewed publication. Sure, we've got thousands of kids who have benefited, and I'll make the data available to anybody who wants to review it. On that note, I have to stop. We got 1 minute left. I have just enough time to break down. We don't have time for questions right now, but I'll stick around afterward, answer your questions. And let me conclude this presentation by jumping through this real quickly. We don't have time to talk about strategy, but in February, a federal court in Illinois ruled for the first time in history that the class of children who are eligible for EPSDT benefits and for whom those benefits have been denied are a class in a class action suit represented by 2 very courageous attorneys who brought the suit. These characters deserve a round of applause because they are the ones who are going to bring EPSDT, BHRS, community-based mental health treatment to life in Illinois. Thank you for attending. I appreciate your patience in getting it started.